And things did not look super difficult at first. We knew the hardware gap, yes, but ultimately, I think that time has proven that we've underestimated the task. As we got closer to the final release, we saw significant improvements each and every day, and we really believed we would deliver in the final day zero update.
I just don't buy it. Let's prove them wrong. Hey guys, Turk here. I hope you're having a great day. I have had a lot of high expectations from... Stop biting me, dude. Hey guys, Turk here. I hope you're having a great day. I have had high expectations from CD Projekt Red's latest release, Cyberpunk 2077, ever since I saw their launch trailer back in 2013. Now, in a vacuum, my experience with the game has been quite excellent. I've played some buggy games from the likes of Bethesda and BioWare, so I've learned that game launches will always have some bumps along the way. This is by no means me defending CD Projekt Red, but it should remind us that no game is perfect. Glitches, fortunately, they do become memes, and we will all look back on these days where our vehicles just glitch into the heavens or a cop magically spawns in and wastes us from behind. Glitches aside though, the game is genuinely unplayable at times. However, after watching the CDPR apology video, it got me curious. Are they really telling us the truth? In an age of rampant marketing fluff, is there a way to cut to the core and keep CDPR accountable for what they've promised us? Let's jack in. For starters, I don't have an accurate way of dissecting the individual bugs occurring in the game, and to be quite frank, CDPR has done a pretty decent job rolling out patches to combat the issues with their engine. But at its core, this game is designed for next generation hardware. Let's start at the drawing board and take a look at Cyberpunk's hardware requirements page. Clearly, this is a next generation game, and even 1080p requires components that would surpass even my previous $600 1080p build. Of course, increasing our system's price tag does unlock some higher resolutions and better detail settings, but consider this. The lowest end recommended GPU was released in 2013. Now, let's focus on the troublemakers. That's the last generation consoles. I call them last generation because the PS4 Pro and Xbox One X are more comparable to a PC and the gaming experience for the previous few years. This video will be focusing on the PlayStation 4, but most of the talking points can be translated to the Xbox. At the heart of the PlayStation 4 is an APU codenamed Liverpool. This accelerated processing unit contains 8 Jaguar-based CPU cores, and the GPU houses 1152 shader units of the GCN2 based architecture. Sure, that sounds great, but let's hit pause. These architectures were released back in 2013. The CPU runs at a paltry 1.6 GHz, and the GPU only manages 800 MHz. Not only that, but the underlying system is built on components from that era. DDR3, GDDR5, spinning hard drives. And guys, the older generation designs are just bound to cause problems for a game designed with this generation's PC hardware in mind. Now let's put these systems side by side. It's glaring just how underpowered the PS4 is in comparison to even our minimum specification. Even so, the minimum spec, as we'll see later in the video, is mired with its own problems. Today, we're going to be investigating each of these components and try to determine the smoking gun why Cyberpunk 2077 plays poorly on the last-gen consoles. This hardware is not an exact image of the PlayStation 4's hardware. I will have to pick components based on what I've got on hand, as well as how they perform when compared to the old consoles. Our testbed did require me to do a little bit of digging through my storage room from my early days over at Tom's Hardware, but I did manage to find my socket AM3 Plus test setup. Our processor today will be the 8-core FX8350 processor. It boosts up to 4.2 GHz, which is a massive gain compared to the consoles, so we're going to have to dial it back with some of the overclocking settings to match our PS4's frequency. Our motherboard will be the lovely Asus 970 Pro Gaming Aura. Though it does have the ability to equip an M.2 drive, I'm only going to be running a run-of-the-mill 500GB 7200 RPM drive in this system. With this dated hardware, I'm also using 8GB of DDR3 at 1600 MHz. I did try to run the system at 4GB to better simulate the console, it just didn't run. GPU selection is tricky for this comparison. To best simulate a PlayStation 4, I need a GCN2 based card that matches the shader count and compute unit count of the PlayStation. Unfortunately, the R9 260 is significantly underpowered, and the R9 290, it's practically double the console's capacity. If we step back to the GCN1, however, the R9 280 does match its numbers, but I just don't have any of those on hand. Though digging through some of the comparative benchmark data, our old dinosaur of a 7970, wow, this thing's old. It does have enough headroom in here to run at the PlayStation 4 frequencies, and it has pretty similar performance. Again, this is not equivalent to a PS4, but it does fit the requirements for an analog in today's experiments. Let's start today with the obvious comparison, a spinning hard drive versus a more modern SSD.
To give a concrete example and the main culprit, we had to constantly improve our in-game streaming system for all gen consoles. Streaming is responsible for feeding the engine with what you see on screen, as well as the game mechanics. Since the city is so packed and the disk bandwidth of all gens is what it is, it constantly challenged us.
CDPR claims that asset streaming is the largest culprit for performance issues, and what better way to get those assets out than upgrading to a faster interface? Not so fast. In this chart, we are looking at the hard drive activity while running my driving benchmark loop close to the Corpo Square. On the top, we have a slow hard drive mode enabled. In the middle is running standard options. And on the bottom, we've just cloned our hard drive and just threw it onto this SSD here. At 720p low settings, the hard disk is clearly pegged, running nearly 100% usage during the entire test run, and it only squeaks out an average 20 megabytes per second in read rates, which is actually quite good for a spinning disk. The SSD clearly shows that the improved interface increases the available bandwidth and transaction speed, dropping the disk activity to more manageable levels. But why on earth would we see less FPS? As perplexing as it sounds, the explanation, it makes a bit of sense. With the spinning disk, the game's architecture is forced to slow down the asset usage to accommodate for the slower transfer speeds. We've heard this before when we've heard of Mark Cerny's PS5 presentations. This results in our dreaded texture pop-in, cars appearing out of thin air, and the like. But by introducing the SSD, the game's architecture attempts to transfer assets from the disk and fill its memory to better optimize transactions between the CPU, the GPU, and the RAM. But with only 8 gigabytes of RAM at our disposal, we are crippling our system by leaving no extra room for the OS and underlying game code to manage swap space and the like. So for anyone hoping for an easy fix, the SSD alone is just not going to cut it. The next obvious improvement we hope to get for resolution and frame rate is the GPU. Using the 7970 as reference, if the stock 7970 data is confusing, its sluggish performance is due to the incredible CPU bottleneck throttling the GPU. This old dog's architecture just isn't enough. With no GPU headroom to spare, I look towards the PS4 Pro, and sure enough, its GPU is significantly better than the OG console. Even better, its Polaris-based GPU is very similar to my RX 580. Adjusting that 580 to match the clock speed of the GPU and the VRAM, our makeshift PS4 Pro manages to obtain 30 FPS at 900p with medium settings, and it even opens up 1080p gameplay, though at the cost of smoothness. This also lines up with Digital Foundry's findings that the PS4 Pro manages to run at a dynamic 1188p, and we're right on track. Slapping a couple more charts on the screen, the PS4's experience is clearly tailored for 720p and a mix between low and medium detail settings. If we account for OS and the API overhead, our makeshift console is in the ballpark here. Regardless, improving the GPU isn't enough to save Cyberpunk. There's one caveat to the GPU data that you might have missed, and that's the fact that the PS4 Pro also runs its CPU at a higher clock speed. The PS4 Pro runs its CPU at 2100 MHz, and the base PS4 is at 1600 MHz. That's a 31% improvement in clock speed, which is honestly really hard to ignore. With the increased clock speed, memory, disk, and GPU responsiveness improve, and our data does show this. With the base PS4 settings locked in, our system struggles to maintain 19 FPS at 1600 MHz, but adding the additional CPU frequency bumps us up to nearly playable frame rates. This shows us that even if we fix the CPU, there are still issues with the base PS4. And since I don't have any additional DDR3 memory to throw at this machine, my guess is if we would increase our memory capacity, we could eliminate a lot of the resource contention and obtain a smoother experience. However, the PS4 and PS4 Pro don't exactly have access to just add memory, so that'll just have to be something that waits for another day. Let's take a moment to bash on the minimum spec PC for a minute. If we run each of these PC configurations at their default settings, the ancient architectures continue to show their deficiencies, and even the venerable RX 580 is starting to lose steam. It also proves the point that Cyberpunk 2077 clearly needs a more recent CPU, GPU, RAM, hard drive solution in order to have an enjoyable experience. And given the current PC hardware supply issues, many gamers, they just might be stuck. As much as we have loved our old base PS4s, it's safe to say that their age of excellence is over. Games have evolved so much that no single component is at fault for the bad performance, it's the entire architecture. Getting Cyberpunk to work for this console will require lots of workarounds for the many different bottlenecks inherent to the console. I do have to commend CDPR for trying to get their game into the hands of as many gamers as they could. However, this version of the game should have never actually been sold to the base consoles. With their apology video, I feel like they're at least identifying the surface level reasoning behind the poor performance, but keep in mind the sheer amount of work that's going to be required to deliver their proposed roadmap. I don't expect any graphical improvements to be game-changing, but hopefully they can get the console to run at more than 30 FPS. Thank you guys for watching the video. I really do hope that you enjoyed it. We've got a lot of cool content coming your way here in 2021, so make sure you hit the bell icon and the subscribe button down below to join the Turk Force and to get notified when I upload videos. If you want to participate in the process or get access to this sort of content before we put the video out, hop on into our Discord and swing by my Twitch channel. We've got tech talk, salty gameplay, streaming help for anyone that asks. With that all said, guys, take care.